The sound of a gavel is supposed to signal finality and end to the chaos. For Ava Collins, it was the sound of her world shattering into a million irreparable pieces. Standing in the cold, sterile courtroom, she watched the man she had loved for a decade, the man whose dreams she had funded with her own inheritance, walk away with everything. Her home, their savings, the company she helped build, all of it gone. He didn't even look back. Just a flicker of a triumphant smirk was all she got. Left with a beat-up car, a box of clothes, and a heart hollowed out by betrayal, she had never felt more alone or invisible. But what Ava didn't know, and what her ex-husband couldn't possibly imagine, was that in just a few days a letter would arrive that would change everything. A letter that would connect her to an unimaginable legacy and prove that sometimes rock bottom is the perfect foundation on which to build an empire. The courtroom air was thick with a silence that felt heavier than sound. Ava Collins stood beside her court-appointed lawyer, a young man whose face was a mask of weary resignation. Her hands were clenched so tightly her knuckles were white, the only anchor in a dizzying sea of loss. Across the room, her soon-to-be ex-husband Daniel sat perfectly composed in a Tom Ford suit that she had bought him for their 8th anniversary. His lawyer, a shark in pinstripes named Mitchell Vance, shuffled his papers with an air of practiced victory. After careful review of the financial disclosures and marital assets, Judge Miller began, his voice devoid of emotion. This court finds that the prenuptial agreement signed by Ms. Collins on June 4, 2015 is valid and enforceable. Ava felt the air leave her lungs. The prenup. The document Daniel had slid in front of her a week before their wedding, calling it a mere formality, a just-in-case for his tech startup Innovate Dynamics. At the time, the company was just an idea sketched on napkins in their tiny apartment funded by the $20,000 left to Ava by her late grandmother. "It's to protect us, honey," he had whispered, his voice smooth as silk. "To keep business separate so we can focus on our life together." She had trusted him. She had signed it without a second thought. Furthermore, the judge continued, his eyes scanning the document, the court recognizes Innovate Dynamics, its assets, and all subsequent profits as the sole property of Mr. Daniel Fletcher as stipulated. A quiet gasp escaped Ava's lips. Sole property. She remembered the all-nighters she'd pulled designing the company's logo, building its first website, managing the books while Daniel focused on coding. She remembered skipping vacations, selling her own car, and pouring every spare dollar into his dream. Their dream. Mitchell Vance stood. "Your Honor, we also have the matter of the marital home." "Yes." The judge nodded. The down payment for the property was sourced from an initial seed funding round for Innovate Dynamics. As such, the home is considered a corporate asset. Full ownership is awarded to Mr. Fletcher. Ava's legs felt weak. The house in the suburbs, the one with the garden she'd spent years cultivating, the one where they had planned to raise a family. It wasn't just brick and mortar. It was the repository of a decade of her life, and he was taking it. The final humiliations came swiftly. Their joint savings account, which Daniel had systematically drained into a corporate account a month before filing for divorce, was deemed part of the business. The stocks she thought they owned together were all in his name. The judge awarded her no alimony, citing the prenup's ironclad clauses. She was to be given her personal belongings, the 2012 Honda Civic she'd owned before they even met, and nothing else. To add insult to injury, the judge ruled that she was responsible for half of the couple's shared credit card debt, a sum that had ballooned thanks to Daniel's lavish spending in the final months of their marriage. The gavel fell. The sound echoed in the cavernous room, a sharp, cruel finality. It was over. Daniel stood smoothing the front of his jacket. He turned, and for a moment his eyes met Ava's across the room. There was no remorse, no sadness, just the cool, calculating glint of a victor. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to his lawyer and walked out without a word to her. Ava remained frozen, the lawyer's hand on her arm, a distant pressure. The world had dissolved into a low hum. She had walked into this courthouse as a wife, a partner, a co-builder of a life. She was walking out as a debtor, a fool with nothing to her name but the clothes on her back. Outside, the city air was crisp and unforgiving. She found Daniel leaning against his new Porsche 911, a gleaming black beast that had replaced the modest sedan they once shared. "Daniel," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "How could you?" He finally looked at her, his expression one of mild irritation, as if she were a piece of lint on his expensive suit. "It's just business, Ava. You were never cut out for this level of success. You're too sentimental. I believed in you." She choked out a tear, finally escaping and tracing a cold path down her cheek. "I gave you everything. And I gave you a very exciting life for a few years," he said with a condescending smile. "You should be grateful. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a board meeting." He slid into the driver's seat, the engine roaring to life. "I'll have my assistant arrange a time for you to get your things. You have 24 hours. He sped away, leaving Ava standing on the pavement, enveloped in the smell of his exhaust. The crushing weight of his betrayal of the court's cold decree settled upon her. She looked at her reflection in the dark glass of the courthouse doors, a woman she barely recognized, stripped of her past and with no foreseeable future. The only way to go was down. Rock bottom wasn't a dramatic crashing fall. It was a slow, quiet sinking. It was the feeling of the cold leather of her friend Maya's sofa against her cheek at 3 a.m., the muffled sounds of New York City traffic, a constant, lonely reminder that the world was moving on without her. Maya had been a saint. She'd opened her tiny one-bedroom apartment without hesitation, setting Ava up on the pull-out couch and filling the fridge with comfort food that Ava had no appetite for. "You stay as long as you need," Maya had insisted, her voice fierce with loyalty. "We'll figure this out. He won't win, not in the long run." But it felt like he had already won. The 24 hours Daniel had given her to collect her life had been a blur of humiliation. His assistant, a coolly efficient woman half Ava's age, had followed her from room to room with a clipboard, making sure she only took items from an approved list. Her clothes, her books, a few sentimental trinkets. Every piece of furniture, every piece of art they had picked out together, even the worn-out armchair she loved to read in, was now his. The garden she had poured her soul into was the hardest to leave. Her roses were just beginning to bloom. Now days melted into a gray fog. Ava spent hours scrolling through job sites on Maya's laptop. The graphic design portfolio she had once been proud of felt dated. She hadn't worked a full-time job in years, having dedicated herself to Innovate Dynamics. Her resume had a gaping 10-year hole filled with words like partner and co-founder, titles that the court had legally invalidated. In interviews for junior designer positions, she was met with thinly veiled suspicion. "So you were a co-founder of a successful tech firm, and now you want an entry-level position with us?" One interviewer had asked, his eyebrow raised in disbelief. Rejection followed rejection. She was either overqualified or underexperienced, a paradox that left her feeling utterly useless. The credit card debt loomed over her, the statements arriving with menacing red letters. She started selling what little she had left of value, a pair of earrings from her mother, a designer bag Daniel had bought her in a moment of feigned generosity. Each sale felt like chipping away another piece of herself. One afternoon, desperate for a sliver of purpose, she logged onto a freelance website. She saw a posting from a small local bakery that needed a new logo for a pittance. The pay was barely enough for a week's worth of groceries, but it was something. She spent 2 days pouring herself into the design, creating a warm, inviting logo of a whisk intertwined with a sprig of wheat. It was the first time in months she had felt a flicker of her old self, the creative, hopeful woman she had been before Daniel. She sent the design to the bakery owner, a kindly older woman named Mrs. Gable. An hour later, her phone buzzed with an email. "Dear Ava," it read, "it's absolutely perfect. It's more than I could have ever hoped for. You have a true gift. Thank you." Reading those words, Ava felt a strange pressure build behind her eyes. It wasn't the soul-crushing sadness she had grown accustomed to. It was something else, a pinprick of light in the suffocating darkness. It wasn't about the money. It was about being seen, about creating something good and having it be appreciated. That evening, Daniel's face was plastered across the cover of Tech Magnate Monthly. The headline read, "Daniel Fletcher, the self-made visionary behind Innovate Dynamics' meteoric rise." The article painted him as a lone genius, a brilliant mind who had built an empire from scratch. There was no mention of a wife, no acknowledgement of a partner who had been there from the beginning. It was a complete erasure of her existence. Maya saw the magazine in a bodega and threw it in the trash before Ava could see it, but the damage was done. Ava saw the headline on a newsstand. The small spark of hope from Mrs. Gable's email was almost extinguished by the sheer scale of Daniel's fabricated narrative. He wasn't just taking their assets. He was rewriting their history, stealing her past, and claiming it as his own. That night, as she lay on the lumpy sofa, the weight of it all pressed down. She thought about giving up, about letting the despair finally swallow her whole. But then she thought of Mrs. Gable's kindness, of the simple joy in creating that logo. It was a tiny rebellion, a refusal to be completely erased. He could take the house, the money, the company. He could plaster his lies on every magazine cover in the country. But he couldn't take that small, resilient spark inside her. She didn't know how, but she would find a way to fan it back into a flame. She had to. It was all she had left. Life began to settle into a grim, monotonous rhythm. Ava woke up on Maya's couch, spent her days hunting for freelance gigs that paid next to nothing, and her nights trying to ignore the gnawing anxiety of her mounting debt. She became an expert at smiling through Maya's worried glances and insisting she was fine, a word that had lost all meaning. She was surviving, but she wasn't living. About 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, a certified mail notice was stuck to the front door of Maya's apartment building. It was addressed to Ava Collins. "Probably another debt collector," Ava said, her stomach twisting. "They're getting creative." "It looks official," Maya said, handing her the slip. "It's from a law firm, Covington and Sterling. Sounds expensive." Ava's heart hammered against her ribs. Covington and Sterling. The name sounded like old money and mahogany-paneled boardrooms. It had to be a mistake. Or worse, maybe Daniel had found some new way to torment her, some legal loophole to sue her for something she didn't even have. "I'm not going," Ava said, tossing the slip onto the small coffee table. "I can't afford a lawyer, especially not one from a place with a name like that. It's a trap." "Or it's not," Maya countered, picking up the slip. "What if it's important? You can't just ignore it, Ava. Go to the post office, get the letter. At least then you'll know what you're dealing with." After a day of Maya's relentless but gentle prodding, Ava relented. She walked the 10 blocks to the post office, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. She handed the slip to the clerk, who returned with a thick, cream-colored envelope. The return address was on Wall Street. On the back was a wax seal, a deep crimson stamped with an ornate K. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The paper was heavy, a quality she hadn't felt in years. The letter was brief and formal. "Dear Ms. Collins, this letter serves as a formal request for your presence at the offices of Covington and Sterling. We are handling the estate of our late client, Mr. Arthur Kensington, and your attendance is urgently required for the reading of his last will and testament. A meeting has been scheduled for you on Friday, October 17th at 10:00 a.m. Sincerely, Walter Peterson, Senior Partner, Covington and Sterling." Arthur Kensington. The name meant nothing to her. She searched her memory, trying to place it. A distant relative. An old family friend. Nothing. Her family was small, her parents having been only children themselves. Her grandparents were all gone. She was sure she had never heard the name Kensington in her life. "It has to be a mistake," she told Maya that evening, showing her the letter. "They've got the wrong Ava Collins." "Is your social security number on it?" Maya asked, ever the pragmatist. Ava checked the bottom of the page. It was there, printed in small, precise numbers. Her number. "Okay, so it's not a mistake?" Maya said, her eyes wide. "Who is Arthur Kensington?" A quick search on Maya's laptop provided the answer, and it was one that made the room spin. Arthur Kensington wasn't just a man, he was a legend. A reclusive billionaire, the titan behind Kensington Industries, a sprawling global conglomerate with interests in technology, shipping, and real estate. He was a mythical figure in the financial world, rarely photographed, known for his eccentricities and his staggering wealth estimated by Forbes to be in the tens of billions. The screen was filled with obituaries. Arthur Kensington had passed away a week ago at the age of 92. "This is insane," Ava whispered, scrolling through photos of Kensington Tower, a gleaming skyscraper that dominated the Manhattan skyline. "What could a man like that possibly have to do with me?" "I have no idea," Maya breathed. "But you have to go. Ava, you have to go to that meeting." The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but now it was mingled with a dizzying, terrifying curiosity. For weeks her world had been small and gray, confined to this apartment and the crushing reality of her failure. This letter, with its crimson seal and impossible request, felt like a door opening into a different universe. She had no idea what lay on the other side. It could be another dead end, another cruel joke. But it was the first thing that hadn't been a bill or a rejection notice in a very long time. It was a mystery, and it was hers. Dressed in her only presentable outfit, a simple black dress and a blazer she'd bought for a job interview she didn't get, Ava stood before the imposing brass doors of Covington and Sterling. The Wall Street address felt a world away from Maya's cramped apartment. Men and women in impeccably tailored suits rushed past, their faces set with purpose. Ava felt like a ghost and imposter in a world she was never meant to enter. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the heavy door open. The lobby was a cathedral of wealth, all marble floors, dark wood, and hushed reverence. A receptionist directed her to the 40th floor. The elevator ride was silent and swift, her reflection in the polished brass walls looking pale and anxious. The 40th floor was even quieter. A woman with a warm smile greeted her. "Ms. Collins, Mr. Peterson is expecting you." She was led down a long hallway lined with oil paintings of stern-faced men, presumably former partners. The door at the end of the hall opened into a vast corner office with a panoramic view of the New York harbor and the Statue of Liberty. An older man with kind eyes and a neatly trimmed white beard rose from behind a massive mahogany desk. "Ms. Collins, thank you for coming. I'm Walter Peterson." He gestured to a leather armchair opposite his desk. "Please have a seat." Ava sat, her hands clutching her purse in her lap. "Mr. Peterson, I think there's been a mistake. I received your letter, but I don't know anyone named Arthur Kensington." Mr. Peterson gave her a gentle, knowing smile. He folded his hands on the desk. "No, Ms. Collins, there is no mistake. Arthur knew who you were. He followed your life from a distance for many years." Ava's brow furrowed in confusion. "Followed my life? Why, I don't understand." "It's a bit of a story," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Your maternal grandfather was named Robert Miller, correct?" "Yes," Ava confirmed. "Robert had a younger brother. When they were young men, they had a severe falling out over the family business, a small manufacturing plant. The argument was bitter and the family was torn apart. Robert stayed and eventually ran the business into the ground. His younger brother was disowned, cast out with nothing. That younger brother changed his name, moved to the city, and vowed to build something of his own. The name he chose was Arthur Kensington." The air in the room seemed to thin. Ava stared at him, trying to process the information. An estranged great-uncle. A family secret so deep it had been buried completely. "My grandfather never mentioned a brother," she said, her voice faint. "I don't doubt it." The pride and the pain ran deep on both sides, Mr. Peterson explained. But Arthur never completely let go. He kept tabs on his brother's family discreetly through investigators. He knew when your mother was born, when she married, and when you were born. He watched you grow up, saw you get married, and he saw you get divorced. A chill went down Ava's spine. This mysterious, powerful man had been a silent observer of her entire life. Arthur was a very private man, but he believed in blood, Peterson continued. He had no children of his own. In his final years, he grew to admire your resilience, what he called your Miller grit. He was disappointed by how your marriage ended. He felt a great injustice had been done. Mr. Peterson slid a thick leather-bound document across the desk. Ms. Collins, this is the last will and testament of Arthur Kensington. He signed it 2 weeks ago, the day after your divorce was finalized. He paused, his gaze steady and serious. He named you as his sole beneficiary. He left you everything. Ava just stared at the document. The words sole beneficiary and everything echoed in the silent room, but refused to form a coherent thought. Everything. She repeated the word, sounding foreign. What? What is everything? Everything. Mr. Peterson reiterated, his voice gentle but firm. His entire estate, his properties, his art collection, his personal accounts, and his controlling interest in Kensington Industries. He let the name hang in the air. Kensington Industries. The global conglomerate. The skyscraper. The tens of billions of dollars. Ava felt a wave of vertigo. Her mind flashed back to just yesterday, to the despair of counting loose change to see if she could afford a subway ride. She thought of the cold courtroom, of Daniel's sneer, of the suffocating feeling of being worth nothing. It couldn't be real. This was a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and malnutrition. This is impossible, she stammered, shaking her head. This is a joke. I assure you, Ms. Collins, Arthur Kensington did not have a sense of humor about his legacy, Mr. Peterson said calmly. You are now, for all intents and purposes, one of the wealthiest women in the world. He opened the folio, revealing page after page of legal text. But Ava wasn't seeing the words. She was seeing a new reality. Split open before her was a reality so vast and unimaginable that it threatened to engulf her. Wealth, power, and empire she knew nothing about. All of this fell onto her shoulders. The woman who just a few days ago had no future now inherited a future she could not even imagine. The news broke like a tsunami. Reclusive billionaire Arthur Kensington leaves entire $30 billion fortune to unknown grandniece. The headlines were splashed across every major news outlet: the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, Forbes. Ava's name, once relegated to court documents and rejection emails, was suddenly the most talked-about name in the financial world. Paparazzi camped outside Maya's apartment building. Reporters shouted questions at her whenever she dared to peek outside. Her face, a grainy photo pulled from her old, forgotten social media profile, was everywhere. She had gone from invisible to infamous overnight. Daniel saw it on the large screen mounted on his office wall, the one usually tuned to the stock market ticker. He was in the middle of a meeting boasting about Q3 projections when Ava's face appeared on screen next to the Kensington Industries logo. He stopped mid-sentence. The coffee cup in his hand trembled, rattling against its saucer. His initial reaction was stunned disbelief, followed by a surge of white-hot rage that was so intense it made him dizzy. Ava. His sentimental, naive, financially illiterate ex-wife was the heir to the Kensington empire. The absurdity of it was almost comical. He had discarded her like a piece of outdated hardware, only to find out she was the key to the entire system. All his striving, his ruthless ambition, his carefully constructed success, it all felt like a child's sandcastle next to the mountain of gold that had just fallen into her lap. His mind began to churn, the anger quickly solidifying into cold, hard calculation. There had to be a way to get his hands on it. There had to be. Meanwhile, Ava was living in a surreal bubble. Mr. Peterson had moved her from Maya's apartment to a secure penthouse suite at the Carlisle Hotel under an assumed name. He had hired a private security detail and a public relations team to manage the media storm. Her life was no longer her own. It was a series of scheduled meetings, briefings, and legal consultations. Her first visit to Kensington Tower was the most intimidating experience of her life. The building itself was a monument to power, a shard of glass and steel that pierced the clouds. Mr. Peterson escorted her through a private entrance to the top-floor executive offices. The air was different up here, rarefied and still. He led her into a cavernous boardroom. A long, polished obsidian table was surrounded by 20 chairs. Seated around it were the executive board members of Kensington Industries, the dozen or so people who ran the day-to-day operations of the global empire. They were all older, impeccably dressed, and their faces were a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and outright hostility. Mr. Peterson made the introductions. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to Ms. Ava Collins." Ava felt 100 eyes dissecting her. Her simple black dress felt like a cheap costume. These were titans of industry, people who negotiated billion-dollar deals before breakfast, and she was the woman who just a week ago was designing a logo for a bakery. A man at the head of the table with silver hair and a stern expression stood up. Mr. Peterson had briefed her on him. This was Gregory Finch, the Chief Operating Officer, Arthur Kensington's longtime second-in-command. He had expected to be named chairman of the board. "Ms. Collins," Finch began, his voice smooth but with an edge of steel. "Welcome to Kensington Industries. This is all quite a surprise." Arthur was a man of many secrets, it would seem. The implication was clear: she was the biggest and most unwelcome secret of all. "We have, of course, prepared a full briefing for you on our current ventures, our portfolio, and our 5-year strategic plan." He continued, gesturing to a stack of binders thick enough to stop a bullet. "Though I imagine much of this will be rather complex for a newcomer." The condescension was palpable. He saw her not as the new owner, but as an obstacle, a problem to be managed. Ava's throat was dry. She looked at the faces around the table. They were waiting for her to falter, to prove their assumptions right. They saw a lottery winner, a lucky fool who had stumbled into a world she didn't understand. She thought of Daniel, of the way he had dismissed her as too sentimental for success. The same feeling of being underestimated, of being erased, washed over her. But this time something was different. The fear was still there, but beneath it a tiny ember of anger began to glow. They didn't know her. They didn't know the woman who had worked 80-hour weeks to get a startup off the ground, who had balanced books and negotiated with vendors and designed entire marketing campaigns from her kitchen table. She met Gregory Finch's gaze directly. Her voice when she spoke was quiet but steady. "Thank you, Mr. Finch. I appreciate the briefing documents. I'm a fast learner." She looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member. "I know this is unexpected for all of you. It's unexpected for me, too. I won't pretend to know everything about Kensington Industries today. But I promise you this: I am not here to run this company into the ground. This is my family's legacy, and I intend to honor it. Now," she said, her voice gaining a new firmness, "why don't you start by telling me about the logistics division's profit margin decline last quarter?" A stunned silence fell over the room. They had expected tears or nervous platitudes. They had not expected a direct, intelligent question. Mr. Peterson, standing by the door, allowed himself a small, private smile. The Miller grit, he thought. It was there after all. Ava had survived the first test. But she knew with chilling certainty that the battles were just beginning. Daniel Fletcher watched the clip of Ava's first press conference for the 10th time. It was a short, carefully managed event held on the steps of Kensington Tower. She looked different. Her hair was styled, she wore a sophisticated navy blue power suit, and she stood flanked by Walter Peterson and a team of imposing security guards. She spoke calmly and confidently, answering the reporter's vetted questions with a poise he had never seen in her. "I am committed to upholding the values and vision of my great-uncle Arthur Kensington," she said, her voice steady. "My primary focus is to learn to listen to the incredible team already in place, and to ensure a stable and prosperous future for Kensington Industries." Every word was like a needle under his skin. This wasn't the broken woman he had left on the courthouse steps. This was someone new, someone powerful, and she was wielding the power that should have been his. His rage had now cooled into a singular obsessive purpose. He had been cheated. In his mind, her inheritance was an extension of their marital assets. She must have known about this connection, this potential windfall. She must have hidden it from him from the court. It was the only explanation that made sense to his narcissistic mind. He summoned Mitchell Vance, his piranha of a lawyer, to his gleaming minimalist office overlooking the city. "She hid it," Daniel said, pacing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. "There's no other way. She knew she was in line to inherit billions, and she played the victim in court to cheat me out of my rightful share." Vance, ever the opportunist, saw the potential for the biggest payday of his career. "Fraudulent misrepresentation during divorce proceedings is a serious claim, Daniel. If we can prove she had prior knowledge of her relationship with Kensington and the potential for inheritance, we could petition the court to set aside the original judgment and reevaluate the division of assets." "Then do it," Daniel snapped. "I want half. It's rightfully mine. I was the one who taught her about business. I built her up. She owes me." The legal motion landed on Walter Peterson's desk a week later. It was an audacious, slanderous document accusing Ava of a complex and calculated fraud. Daniel's legal team claimed she had orchestrated the entire divorce to cut him out just before her inheritance came through. They demanded a full half of the Kensington estate. The news exploded, creating a new, more scandalous media cycle. The narrative was intoxicating: the self-made tech mogul swindled by his secretive, manipulative ex-wife. Daniel went on a media tour giving interviews to sympathetic hosts. He painted himself as the heartbroken victim, a man who had been betrayed on an unimaginable scale. "I loved her," he said to a daytime talk show host, his face a mask of sorrow. "I thought we were building a life together. To find out that she was hiding this massive secret. It's not about the money. It's about the trust. It's about the lies." The public, always hungry for a story of a wealthy woman being taken down a peg, began to turn. Online forums lit up with comments calling Ava a gold digger and a con artist. The tide of public opinion, which had briefly been in her favor as an underdog, was now turning against her. Ava was in a strategy meeting about Kensington's European shipping routes when Mr. Peterson brought her the news. She read the headlines on the tablet he handed her, her face draining of color. The audacity of Daniel's lies was breathtaking. He had the gall to talk about trust after what he had done to her. Her first instinct was to hide, to let the PR team handle it. The public scrutiny was suffocating. But then the anger returned, colder and sharper this time. He had taken her past, and now he was trying to steal her future. He was attacking her character, her integrity, the very core of who she was. She would not let him. "Walter," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "I want the best litigation team you can find. I don't care what it costs. I want to fight this, and I want to win. I want you to dig into every corner of Daniel's life. His business dealings, his accounts, everything he hid from me during our marriage. He wants to talk about lies. Let's show the world who the real liar is." Mr. Peterson nodded, a glint of approval in his eye. "I've already made some calls. We will assemble a team that will bury him in discovery requests." The battle lines were drawn. It was no longer just a divorce case. It was a war. Daniel had his fabricated story and the court of public opinion. Ava had the truth and the unlimited resources of Kensington Industries. As she stood in the boardroom, looking out over the city that was now hers to command, she felt a profound shift within herself. She was no longer just defending her inheritance. She was defending her name, her history, and her right to exist outside of Daniel Fletcher's shadow. The timid woman from the first courtroom was gone for good. In her place was a queen ready to defend her castle. The legal battle was a war of attrition. Daniel's team filed motion after motion, burying Ava's lawyers in paperwork, hoping to overwhelm her to force a settlement. But they had severely underestimated their opponent. Ava, backed by the formidable power of Covington and Sterling, met every challenge head-on. She spent her days in boardroom meetings and her evenings in strategy sessions with her legal team. The two worlds, business and law, began to merge. In the boardroom, Gregory Finch and his allies continued to test her. They saw the lawsuit as a distraction, a sign of her unsuitability to lead. They presented her with deliberately complex financial models and peppered her with jargon-laden questions, trying to catch her off guard to expose her ignorance. Collins, Finch said during one particularly grueling meeting about a potential acquisition of a smaller tech firm, given the leveraged buyout structure and the EBITDA multiples, do you truly believe the debt financing is sustainable, especially with the current market volatility? The rest of the board watched, expecting her to defer to him or look to her advisors for help. In the early days, she might have, but weeks of intensive tutoring from Mr. Peterson and her own relentless late-night studying had armed her. She had devoured every book on corporate finance and business strategy she could get her hands on. She didn't hesitate. The market volatility is precisely why this is a prime opportunity, Gregory. She countered, her tone even. Their stock is undervalued. Our internal analysis shows their core technology is sound and has synergy with our own R&D division. The debt is manageable if we restructure our own asset allocation, specifically by divesting from the underperforming real estate portfolio in the Midwest, something I believe you yourself recommended 6 months ago. Finch was visibly taken aback. He had not expected such a detailed strategic response. He had certainly not expected her to use his own past recommendations against him. Around the table, a few of the more neutral board members exchanged impressed glances. Judith, a sharp, discerning woman who oversaw the company's philanthropic arm, offered a small, approving nod. Ava was not just a figurehead. She was learning the game, and she was learning it fast. Her confidence growing, Ava started taking a more active role. She didn't just listen, she questioned. During a review of the company's logistics division, she noticed a series of unusual payments to a shell corporation based in the Cayman Islands. Finch and the CFO dismissed them as standard operational expenses. Ava's instincts, honed by Daniel's financial betrayal, screamed that something was wrong. I want a full independent audit of that division and its connection to this shell company, she declared, overriding Finch's protests. While the auditors went to work, her legal team was making its own discoveries. The discovery process in her lawsuit against Daniel forced him to open his books. And what they found was staggering. He hadn't just hidden a few assets during the divorce. He had built a labyrinth of offshore accounts and shell companies, systematically siphoning money from Innovate Dynamics for years, long before he had even filed for divorce. He had been planning his exit and her erasure for a very long time. More importantly, they found a clear money trail connecting Daniel's offshore accounts to the very same Cayman Islands shell corporation that Ava had flagged in the Kensington audit. The pieces clicked into place. Gregory Finch had been feeding Daniel inside information about Kensington's shipping routes and bidding processes. In return, Daniel was giving him kickbacks laundered through the shell company. Finch wasn't just trying to undermine Ava to gain control of the company. He was actively trying to destroy it from within, colluding with her greatest enemy to do it. He had seen Ava as a naive fool, but in his arrogance he had grown sloppy, believing no one would ever look closely at his operations. Ava convened an emergency board meeting. This time there was no trace of nervousness in her demeanor. She stood at the head of the table, not as an inheritor but as a commander. For the past several months, she began, her voice ringing with cold authority. I have been subjected to tests of my knowledge and my leadership. Some of you have questioned my right to be here. Today I have a question for one of you. Her eyes locked onto Gregory Finch. On a large screen behind her, she projected the auditor's report, a damning web of transactions, emails, and offshore accounts that connected Finch directly to Daniel Fletcher. "Mr. Finch," she said as the blood drained from his face, "can you explain these standard operational expenses to the board?" The room was deathly silent. Finch sputtered, trying to form a denial, but the evidence was irrefutable. His betrayal was laid bare for all to see. The man who had judged her unworthy was exposed as a common corporate thief and traitor. It was a stunning, brutal checkmate. Gregory Finch's fall was as swift as it was spectacular. He was fired by the board in a unanimous vote, escorted out of the building by security, and promptly met by federal agents in the lobby, thanks to an anonymous tip from Covington and Sterling. The scandal rocked the financial world, but Ava's decisive action and transparent handling of the crisis earned her something she hadn't had before: the unwavering respect of her board and the industry. She hadn't just stumbled into power. She had earned it. The revelations about Finch and Daniel's collusion completely torpedoed Daniel's lawsuit. Faced with irrefutable evidence of his own perjury, financial fraud, and corporate espionage, his case crumbled. Not only was his motion to reopen the divorce thrown out, but the evidence Ava's team had uncovered triggered a full-scale investigation by the SEC and the IRS into Innovate Dynamics. The final confrontation didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened when Daniel, stripped of his bravado and facing financial ruin and possible jail time, had the audacity to call her. "Ava, you have to help me," he pleaded, his voice thin and desperate, a pathetic imitation of the confident man who had left her on the pavement. "You can call them off. We had good years together, didn't we? Think of what we built." Ava stood in her office, the office that had once belonged to Arthur Kensington, looking out at the city skyline. She felt a profound, cleansing sense of peace. The anger was gone, replaced by a cool, distant pity. "What we built, Daniel," she replied, her voice calm and final. "You taught me a very valuable lesson. You taught me that some things are built on lies, on a foundation of sand, and they are destined to collapse. I, on the other hand, am building something on a foundation of stone. Goodbye, Daniel." She hung up the phone, severing the final tie to her old life. The news came a few weeks later. Innovate Dynamics was forced into bankruptcy. Daniel Fletcher, the self-made visionary, was facing a barrage of federal charges. He lost everything: the company, the house, the Porsche, and his freedom. The karmic justice was absolute. Months passed. Ava thrived. She wasn't just the owner of Kensington Industries. She was its leader. She had a natural instinct for business, tempered with an empathy her great-uncle never had. She started a new philanthropic branch of the company, overseen by Judith, focused on providing grants and support to women starting their own businesses, ensuring that other women would have the chances she never got. She even reached out to Mrs. Gable from the bakery, whose kind email had been a pinprick of light in her darkest hour, and had her company's foundation invest in expanding the small bakery into a beloved local chain. She wasn't the woman Daniel had tried to erase, nor was she simply the lucky recipient of a billionaire's fortune. She had forged a new identity in the crucible of betrayal and boardroom battles. She was Ava Collins, a woman who had been to rock bottom and had built an empire upon it. One evening, Walter Peterson found her standing in front of a newly commissioned portrait of Arthur Kensington that she had hung in the main lobby. "He would have been proud of you," Walter said quietly. "Prouder than you can imagine." Ava smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. "I think for the first time I'm proud of myself." She had lost everything, only to find that she had everything she ever needed within herself all along. The money and the power were just tools. Her resilience, her intelligence, her Miller grit, that was the true inheritance. And with it she was just getting started. 1 year later, the name Ava Collins was no longer synonymous with scandal or surprise inheritance. It was synonymous with vision. The frantic media storm had long since subsided, replaced by the steady, respectful hum of the financial press tracking Kensington Industries' innovative new trajectory. The woman who had entered the boardroom as a terrified inheritor now chaired its meetings with a quiet authority that left no room for doubt. Her office, once a museum of Arthur Kensington's austere tastes, had been subtly changed. While the grand mahogany desk remained as a symbol of the company's foundation, the walls now featured works by up-and-coming female artists, and blueprints for new projects were often spread across the large conference table. Ava had not erased the past. She was building upon it, adding her own layers, her own color. "The projections are solid," a board member was saying, pointing to a chart on the large screen. "The divestment from the Midwest portfolio and reallocation into renewable energy tech has already yielded a 12% return, far exceeding our initial forecast." "Excellent," Ava said, her eyes scanning the data. "But I didn't call this meeting to review our successes. I called it to propose our next one." She clicked a button and the screen changed. It now displayed a sleek, modern logo with the words, "The Kensington Catalyst Fund." "For the past century," she began, her voice resonating with passion, "Kensington Industries has been a titan of building things. Skyscrapers, shipping fleets, technological infrastructure. Now I want us to build something else, futures." She outlined her vision. The Kensington Catalyst Fund would be the largest venture capital fund in the world, dedicated solely to supporting female-founded startups. It would provide not just capital, but also mentorship from Kensington's top executives, access to their legal teams, and a network of industry connections. "There is an untapped reservoir of talent in the world," Ava explained, looking at each board member. "Brilliant minds with revolutionary ideas who are consistently overlooked and underfunded. We have the resources and the responsibility to change that. This isn't just philanthropy, it's the smartest investment we can make for the future of innovation." Judith, who now sat at Ava's right hand as the head of the new Social Impact Division, smiled warmly. The rest of the board, once skeptical of Ava's every move, was now captivated. They had seen her instincts and intellect transform the company. They trusted her. The vote to approve the $500 million initial funding was unanimous. That evening, Ava met Maya at a quiet restaurant in the West Village, a world away from the gleaming towers of Wall Street. It was their weekly tradition, a grounding ritual that kept Ava connected to the woman she was before the billions. "The Kensington Catalyst Fund," Maya said, shaking her head in awe after Ava told her the news. "You're really doing it. You're changing the whole game." "We're trying to," Ava said with a small smile, sipping her wine. "I just think about where I was, about how I poured every idea I had into a business only to be told I was just sentimental. I want to make sure no other woman with a brilliant idea has to hear that." Their conversation was interrupted by a news alert on Maya's phone. She glanced at it and her expression shifted. "Oh, wow." "What is it?" Ava asked. Maya turned the phone around. The headline read, "Former Tech CEO Daniel Fletcher, sentenced to 15 years in federal prison." There was a photo of Daniel looking gaunt and defeated in a cheap suit, being led from the courthouse in handcuffs. Ava looked at the image for a long moment. There was no triumph, no surge of satisfaction. There was only a quiet, profound sense of finality. He was a ghost from another life, a closed chapter in a book she had long since finished reading. "He got what he deserved," Maya said softly. "Yes, he did." Ava agreed, her gaze turning back to her friend, to the present. "Now tell me about that cute doctor you met." The official launch of the Catalyst Fund was a major event. Ava stood on a stage, not in front of reporters hungry for a scandal, but in front of a room filled with hopeful entrepreneurs, industry leaders, and innovators. She felt no fear, only a deep sense of purpose. "A legacy is not just what you inherit," she said, her voice clear and strong. "It is defined by what you build with it. Today we lay the first stone of a new foundation. A foundation upon which a new generation of leaders, visionaries, and builders will create a world that is more innovative, more equitable, and more brilliant than the one we know today." Later that night, she stood by the panoramic window of her office, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of possibilities. The weight of the skyscraper no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a launching pad. She had not only taken control of her inheritance, but she had also transformed it into a reflection of her own spirit. She was no longer just the keeper of a legacy. She was the architect of a new one. one that would empower thousands and change the world one brilliant idea at a time. The story of the wronged ex-wife was over. The story of Ava Collins, the builder of futures, had just begun. Ava's story is a powerful reminder that our lowest moments do not have to define us. It's a testament to the incredible strength that can be discovered when we are pushed to our absolute limits. She went from the devastation of a brutal divorce where her contributions were erased and her future stolen to the helm of a global empire. But her victory wasn't just in the inheritance. It was in reclaiming her own narrative. She proved that integrity, resilience, and intelligence are worth more than any stock portfolio. The man who saw her as nothing lost everything, while she who was left with nothing found her true worth and built a new legacy. Her journey shows us that sometimes losing everything is the first step toward gaining a world you never knew was possible. What did you think of Ava's incredible turnaround? Do you believe in karmic justice? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were inspired by this story of resilience and empowerment, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that will leave you speechless.